Okay, so imagine you're one of the 5 people in the world who doesn't know anything about The Lord of the Rings. All you know is it's a classic, and people won't shut up about it. So you finally open up the book and you see both a prologue and a foreword from the author, and so you think, what a marvelous way of dipping my toes before reading the story. So then you start reading, and then the author, he just spoils the out of it for you. In very quick succession, you learn all 4 Hobbit protagonists survive their quests, so no matter what crazy situation they're in, you never have to worry about them. Also, the wizard Saruman betrays Gandalf, and it goes on to really imply that the main antagonist Sauron is defeated, since it talks about there being some King Elisar and a Stuart Faramir, and the Hobbits, well, they go on to have their own descendants. All of this is happening, and you're like, hi, I haven't started reading the story yet. Thanks. So then you start reading the story. And then you're assaulted by more nonchalant spoilers that seems to serve no purpose other than to stop the momentum of the plot. You'll find characters in scary circumstances kidnapped by monsters, and then the text will interrupt to say something like, often afterwards, Pippin tried to describe his impression of them. And then you're like, often afterwards sucks. It's a needless reminder that nothing too bad can happen. You're not alone if while reading The Lord of the Rings, you felt as though Tolkien went out of his way to self-sabotage any suspense in his story. And this issue speaks to my heart as a person on your screen. I hate spoilers. I don't like it when my friends tell them to me. I really don't like it when my authors tell them to me. It feels frustrating and pointless and begs the all-important question, was Tolkien like a dumb guy? I can with full confidence assure you that Tolkien was not like a dumb guy. One of my favorite things about Tolkien is that everything he did was intentional, even the stuff you're annoyed by. There's very few whoopsies within The Lord of the Rings. He simply believed that this was the best way to tell his story, and it really, really worked for him, so we can't argue, but we can ask, why? Okay, the first important thing to understand is that spoilers are a relatively modern concern. The first recorded entry of the term occurred in 1971, but it's not like people weren't aware of the concept before that. The director Alfred Hitchcock pleaded with audiences to avoid spoiling his 1960 film Psycho, saying, quote, please don't give away the ending, it's the only one we have. But Tolkien wasn't writing for film, he was participating in a literary tradition, one with, perhaps, different sensibilities around spoilers. You're probably thinking a novel, right? But if you asked, J.R.R. Tolkien, is The Lord of the Rings a novel, sir? He would say, no. Everyone knows that Tolkien was very precise in his language, being a philologist, but not everyone knows that Tolkien was also a dick. But a great dick. Of the dicks, mine favorite dick. In letter 329, Tolkien explains that, quote, my work is not a novel, but a heroic romance. A much older and quite different variety of literature. And I'm sure that you, like me, know exactly what a heroic romance is, but for any dumbos out there, what is it? It's a distinguished class of imaginative literature that flourished in the 1600s, principally in France. Because when I think of The Lord of the Rings, the first thing that comes to my mind is 17th century France. But don't mock him. It's not like the guy could call The Lord of the Rings high fantasy. The genre didn't exist yet. Also, Tolkien was very specific about the kinds of writing that inspired him. I mean, this is the same guy who stopped writing the sequel to The Lord of the Rings because he realized the story would just be a, quote, thriller, not worth doing. I'd love to read it, but that's okay. A thriller implies like a propulsive, suspenseful plot where spoilers would matter more. Such a book would lack the subtlety and grace of 17th century France. Whereas a heroic romance might sound like a dusty, antiquated form of writing, and that's because it literally is. The genre died by 1669, but it was like other types of old stories. There weren't spoiler cultures around the Odyssey or Beowulf. They were about the journey, not the destination, man. But this only half answers the question, because a heroic romance wasn't Tolkien's only description for The Lord of the Rings. He also spoke about how he wrote it as though it was real history.
Well, for instance, this whole matter of the appendices, 100 pages, language, social customs, history. Normally, if you had been writing history as a historian, all these would have existed on a card index before you ever began to write.
Yeah.
Is this true for The Lord of the Rings?
So, yeah. That is partly out of the fact that I'm a meticulous sort of bloke.
And this makes a lot of sense. The detail Tolkien embeds into Middle-earth makes it feel like actual history. And you can't spoil history. I mean, you can, but no one cares. But For the real Tolkien stop being cute, tell us why you actually wrote these books the way you wrote them answer, we have to look back at the same spoiler-filled prologue in which he states, quote, "The prime motive was the desire of a tale-teller to try his hand at a really long story that would hold the attention of readers, amuse them, delight them, and at times maybe excite them or deeply move them." The truth is that Tolkien simply didn't view plot spoilers as an obstacle to delighting, exciting, or moving us, and that ought to tie a clean, crisp bow on the video you clicked on about why Tolkien didn't care about spoilers. The only problem is also Tolkien cared about spoilers. Of the dicks, mine favorite dick. In 1953, before the trilogy was released, Tolkien wrote a letter to his publisher in which he expressed his desire that the third installment in The Lord of the Rings should be entitled The War of the Ring, not The Return of the King. You might ask, why is that? Well, Tolkien felt that The Return of the King spoiled too much, saying, quote, "On reflection, I prefer for Volume 3 The War of the Ring, since it gets in the ring again, and is also more non-committal, and gives less hint about the turn of the story. The chapter titles have been chosen also to give away as little as possible in advance." This point about the cheekily worded chapter titles is true. For instance, the chapter in which Boromir dies is entitled The Departure of Boromir. Not only because depart is a clever euphemism for death, but also because until that point, the story had been seeding Boromir's departure from the Fellowship to Minas Tirith. So despite being heroic romance or history, Tolkien was clearly holding certain cards up his sleeves. This is in contrast to something like The Children of Húrin, in which either Tolkien or his son Christopher committed harder to the history theme by presenting chapters as though they were well-known historical events. These chapters are entitled The Deaths of Túrin, Beleg, and Glaurung, not their departures. I was gonna put a spoiler warning for that, but if I've learned anything from this video, it's that I shouldn't, right? So what does the video essay guy think when Tolkien throws a little curveball, adds some thriller-esque plot development to my neat little video? I'm happy about it. Tolkien is so canonized in my mind as the master architect of my favorite fictional universe, one so detailed that any question I have about it has an answer. George R.R. Martin describes Tolkien as someone who
looms over all fantasy like a mountain, and everybody else is operating in the shadow of Tolkien and what he did.
This impression of Tolkien often makes me view the guy as more of a force of nature than a person. And so I find it oddly comforting that even Tolkien had, perhaps, some conflicting opinions about stuff too. It recontextualizes Tolkien as not just some immovable mountain, but a mountain who sometimes changes into a little bird or something else that would make this metaphor make sense. But it's Tolkien. Smart Money says there's an extremely calculated explanation for all of this. But what if there's not?
So that you had literally invented the world before you even wrote The Hobbit?
Oh yes, indeed.
Why?